For years, royal commentators have debated what the monarchy will look like once Prince William eventually becomes king. Most of those discussions focused on public appearances, succession plans, and the gradual transition from one royal era to another. But according to a growing wave of commentary surrounding recent palace developments, something much more significant may already be happening behind the scenes. Rather than waiting for the next reign to begin, many observers believe Prince William has quietly been laying the foundations for a future monarchy that operates according to a very different set of priorities. And according to those same commentators, the most important part of that process is not who gains influence, but who loses it. What has captured attention across royal circles is the perception that William is no longer simply preparing to inherit the crown one day. Instead, many analysts believe he is already shaping the structure of the institution he expects to lead. Supporters of this interpretation argue that recent events reveal a clear pattern involving authority, accountability, and the gradual reorganization of relationships that have existed within royal circles for years. Critics disagree, suggesting that ordinary succession planning is being transformed into a dramatic palace narrative. Yet regardless of which interpretation proves correct, one thing has become increasingly clear. The conversation is no longer centered solely on the present monarchy. It is centered on the future monarchy and the people who will define it. According to many royal commentators, the story begins with a simple but increasingly important question. What happens to the networks of influence that develop during one reign when an entirely new generation prepares to take control? Throughout royal history, every transition has involved more than just a change of monarch. It has involved changes in priorities, changes in advisors, changes in relationships, and often changes in the balance of influence surrounding the crown. Supporters of the narrative argue that Prince William understands this reality better than most people realize, and that many of the developments attracting attention today are actually part of a much longer process that has been unfolding quietly for years. What makes the discussion especially fascinating is that it is not primarily about public disagreements or dramatic confrontations. In fact, many commentators point out that the most significant institutional changes rarely happen through public arguments. They happen through planning, through administration, through carefully structured decisions that appear relatively minor when viewed individually, but become much more significant when examined together. According to supporters of the narrative, this is precisely the approach William prefers. Rather than creating headlines through conflict, they argue that he focuses on creating systems designed to achieve long-term goals. This perception has become increasingly connected to discussions surrounding Queen Camilla and the circle of advisors, supporters, and long-standing allies who have been associated with her position over the years. For decades, Camilla's rise within the monarchy represented one of the most remarkable transformations in modern royal history. She moved from controversy to acceptance, from acceptance to influence, and eventually to becoming queen alongside King Charles III. Throughout that journey, relationships played an important role. Support networks developed, advisors established connections, long-standing alliances formed within royal circles. According to many observers, these networks became part of the institutional landscape of the current reign. However, supporters of the narrative argue that William's future monarchy may be built around a different philosophy. Rather than relying heavily on inherited networks, they believe he prefers a more streamlined structure centered on clearly defined constitutional responsibilities and a smaller group of trusted figures. Whether that interpretation accurately reflects reality remains a matter of debate, but it has become increasingly influential among royal commentators because it appears consistent with William's broader public image. For years, he has been associated with modernization, efficiency, and long-term planning. He has frequently emphasized the importance of focusing resources effectively. He has often been portrayed as someone interested in creating a monarchy that is leaner, more disciplined, and more clearly aligned with public expectations. According to many analysts, these priorities naturally raise questions about how future leadership will approach relationships and arrangements inherited from previous eras. That is where the current controversy begins gaining momentum. Because the discussion is no longer simply about individual personalities. It is about structure, it is about influence, and it is about whether the next generation intends to preserve existing networks or gradually replace them with a completely new framework. According to many royal observers, That larger question sits at the heart of the entire story. The issue is not whether William intends to challenge specific individuals. The issue is whether he is quietly constructing a future royal court organized around different principles than the one that exists today. And according to supporters of the narrative, several symbolic developments over the past few years suggest that this process may already be underway, setting the stage for a much larger transformation than most people initially realized. According to many royal commentators, the turning point in this narrative is often traced back to a debate that, on the surface, appeared surprisingly minor. Supporters of the story frequently point to a royal engagement in early 2023 where Queen Camilla wore a historic brooch that later became the subject of intense discussion among royal observers. To most members of the public, it seemed like an ordinary piece of royal jewelry, the kind of accessory that regularly appears during official engagements without generating lasting controversy. Yet according to commentators who closely follow royal symbolism and protocol, the choice attracted attention because of the historical associations attached to the design. Whether those concerns were justified remains heavily disputed, but within the narrative, this moment is often described as the first visible sign of a much larger disagreement over influence, symbolism, and the boundaries of authority inside the monarchy. According to supporters of the narrative, the issue was never really about the brooch itself. The monarchy is filled with historic objects, many of which carry centuries of symbolism and tradition. What mattered, they argue, was how certain observers interpreted the message attached to the piece and the timing of its appearance. Critics strongly reject the idea that a single item of jewelry could carry such significance, arguing that royal symbolism is often overanalyzed by commentators searching for deeper meaning where none exists. Nevertheless, the discussion gained momentum because it touched on a larger question that has fascinated royal watchers for generations. Where exactly is the line between ceremonial representation and institutional authority? This question reportedly attracted attention far beyond the immediate controversy. Because according to many observers, symbols matter within institutions built on tradition. They communicate continuity, they communicate legitimacy, and they often communicate relationships between individuals and the crown itself. As a result, even seemingly small decisions can sometimes generate broader conversations about what they represent. According to many royal commentators, this is where Prince William allegedly became increasingly attentive to issues involving protocol, symbolism, and the future structure of the monarchy. Supporters of the narrative argue that William's interest was never focused on one specific incident. Instead, they claim he became interested in a broader pattern involving public perception, institutional clarity, and the importance of maintaining clearly defined boundaries around royal authority. Critics counter that such claims rely heavily on speculation about William's private thinking. Yet even they acknowledge that discussions surrounding the future monarchy have increasingly emphasized structure, accountability, and long-term planning. The story gained additional momentum following the coronation in 2023. Publicly, the event was presented as a carefully managed celebration of continuity and national tradition. Yet according to many commentators, certain decisions associated with the ceremony generated debate among royal observers long after the event concluded. Supporters of the narrative frequently point to discussions surrounding historic royal jewels and the use of pieces connected to previous generations of the royal family. They argue that these debates reinforced existing concerns about symbolism and institutional messaging. Critics maintain that such interpretations exaggerate ordinary ceremonial decisions and ignore the practical realities involved in organizing events of that scale. Nevertheless, the conversations continued, and with every new discussion, the narrative surrounding future influence inside the monarchy became stronger. According to many observers, another important factor was public perception. In modern royal life, approval ratings, public trust, and media narratives often influence how commentators interpret broader institutional developments. Supporters of the narrative argue that changing public attitudes created an opportunity for future leadership to think more seriously about how the monarchy should be structured in the years ahead. Rather than focusing exclusively on the present reign, they believe William and those around him increasingly began considering how the institution could operate under future leadership. What makes this phase of the story particularly compelling is that it shifts the focus away from individual personalities and toward systems. The debate is no longer simply about Camilla, William, or any specific royal figure. Instead, it becomes a discussion about how future leadership intends to organize authority, manage influence, and define the boundaries surrounding the crown. According to supporters of the narrative, this is the moment when William's long-term vision allegedly began taking shape. Not through dramatic public confrontations, but through careful planning, gradual preparation, and a growing determination to ensure that future structures would be built around institutional priorities rather than personal relationships. And according to many royal commentators, that perception set the stage for even larger developments that would eventually reshape discussions about influence inside the future monarchy. According to many royal commentators, the next phase of the narrative begins with an issue that has historically influenced every royal transition: public perception. While debates surrounding symbolism, protocol, and institutional boundaries continue generating discussion, supporters of the story argue that the future monarchy was increasingly focused on something much larger. They believe Prince William and those around him were paying close attention to how different royal figures were viewed by the public and how those perceptions might influence the long-term stability of the institution. Whether that interpretation accurately reflects internal palace thinking remains impossible to verify, but within the narrative it becomes a crucial turning point because it shifts the discussion away from individual incidents and toward the broader question of what kind of monarchy the next generation intends to build. According to supporters of the narrative, the coronation represented one of the most important moments in this evolving story. Publicly, the event was designed to project continuity, unity, and stability following the transition from the reign of Queen Elizabeth II to the reign of King Charles III. Yet according to many commentators, conversations surrounding certain ceremonial choices and symbolic decisions continued long after the celebrations ended. Royal observers debated the significance of particular traditions, the role of historic royal jewels, and the ways in which different figures were presented during one of the most watched royal events in modern history. Critics argue that much of this analysis assigns deeper meaning to decisions that were largely ceremonial in nature. Nevertheless, within the narrative, these discussions became another piece of a much larger puzzle. What makes this stage especially important is that another figure begins playing a more visible role in the story. Princess Anne, for decades, and has been regarded as one of the most respected members of the royal family. Her reputation has been built around duty, around discipline, around an unwavering commitment to the institution. Because of that reputation, many commentators believe her opinions carry considerable symbolic weight whenever questions involving royal tradition and legacy emerge. According to supporters of the narrative, Anne increasingly became associated with a vision of the monarchy rooted in continuity, responsibility, and respect for long-established institutional norms. Whether she actually influenced the developments described in the story remains a matter of speculation. However, her presence became increasingly important because she represented a connection between the values of the late Queen Elizabeth II and the priorities of future leadership. At the same time, public opinion continued attracting attention. Modern monarchies operate in an environment where public trust can influence everything from media coverage to broader discussions about relevance and legitimacy. According to many analysts, future leadership cannot afford to ignore how key royal figures are perceived by the public. Supporters of the narrative argue that this reality encouraged a growing emphasis on organizational clarity, institutional discipline, and carefully defined roles. Rather than allowing influence to develop through informal networks, they believe the future monarchy increasingly favored structures designed around accountability and constitutional responsibility. This is where the narrative begins moving beyond symbolism and into strategy. The question is no longer whether specific incidents were controversial. The question becomes what lessons future leadership allegedly drew from those incidents. Supporters of the narrative argue that William's approach was never reactionary. Instead, they claim it was patient, methodical, and focused on long-term outcomes rather than short-term headlines. According to many commentators, this perspective helps explain why discussions about the future monarchy increasingly centered on systems rather than personalities. The focus shifted toward how authority would be organized, how responsibilities would be distributed, and how future leadership intended to prevent competing centers of influence from emerging within the institution. Whether those concerns were justified remains open to debate, but the perception itself became increasingly influential among royal observers. As these discussions expanded, supporters of the narrative began identifying another major development. They argued that future leadership was no longer simply evaluating existing networks of influence, but was actively considering how those networks might function after the next transition of power. And according to many royal commentators, that realization would eventually lead to some of the most consequential changes discussed anywhere in the story, because attention was about to shift from symbolism and perception to the relationships and alliances that had helped shape royal life for years. According to many royal commentators, the next stage of the narrative revolves around something that has historically determined the success or failure of influence within royal institutions: alliances. Throughout history, monarchies have never operated solely through official titles and constitutional authority. They have also been shaped by networks of relationships, trusted advisors, family connections, and long-standing personal loyalties. Supporters of the narrative argue that Prince William understood this reality, and that any effort to reshape the future monarchy would inevitably require addressing not only formal structures, but also the informal relationships that had developed during previous eras. Whether this interpretation accurately reflects internal palace thinking remains impossible to verify, yet within the story it becomes one of the most important turning points because attention begins shifting away from symbolism and toward the individuals who allegedly helped sustain existing influence networks. According to many commentators, one of the most frequently discussed figures in this context is Prince Andrew. For years, Andrew occupied a complicated position within the wider royal landscape. Although his public role changed significantly over time, supporters of the narrative argue that he continued to represent an important connection within certain royal circles. Critics strongly dispute claims regarding the extent of his influence, pointing out that many stories exaggerate private relationships that cannot be independently verified. Nevertheless, within the narrative itself, Andrew becomes symbolic of a broader issue. He represents the idea of inherited networks that future leadership may eventually choose to reconsider. Supporters of the story frequently point to developments involving Royal Lodge and changes to Andrew's position within royal life as evidence that the institution was already moving toward a different structure. They argue that these events were not isolated decisions. Instead, they believe they reflected a larger effort to redefine how influence operates within the monarchy. An effort focused on accountability, an effort focused on organizational clarity, and an effort focused on ensuring that future authority flows through formal constitutional channels rather than informal alliances. Whether that interpretation is correct remains a matter of debate. Yet the perception itself has become increasingly influential among royal observers. According to many analysts, what makes this phase of the narrative particularly compelling is that it aligns closely with William's broader public image. Over the years, he has frequently been associated with discussions about modernization, efficiency, and a more focused monarchy. As a result, supporters of the narrative find it plausible that future leadership would place less emphasis on personal networks and more emphasis on clearly defined institutional roles. Rather than preserving every arrangement inherited from previous generations, they argue that William may prefer a structure designed around a smaller number of trusted figures operating within a more streamlined framework. This perception gained additional momentum as attention increasingly turned toward Prince Edward. According to many commentators, Edward has often been viewed as one of the most dependable and institutionally minded members of the royal family. His reputation for discretion, reliability, and loyalty to the crown has led some observers to portray him as a natural ally in any effort aimed at strengthening institutional stability. Whether such an alliance exists in the manner described by supporters remains speculative, but within the narrative, Edward becomes an important symbol of continuity and administrative discipline. As these themes continued developing, supporters of the story began focusing less on individual controversies and more on the broader architecture of the future monarchy. Who would have influence? Who would have access? Who would help shape future decisions? And perhaps most importantly, which relationships would continue carrying weight once the next reign eventually begins? According to many royal commentators, these questions lie at the center of the entire debate. The narrative is no longer about a brooch, a coronation, or any single event. It is about whether the future monarchy is already undergoing a quiet restructuring. Supporters argue that the evidence points toward a deliberate effort to reduce the importance of inherited alliances while strengthening formal institutional authority. Critics maintain that ordinary succession planning is being transformed into an elaborate palace drama. Yet regardless of which interpretation proves more accurate, one thing remains clear. Increasing numbers of observers believe that the foundations of William's future court are already being established, and that process may ultimately reshape the balance of influence within the monarchy for years to come. According to many royal commentators, the final stage of this narrative is not really about Queen Camilla at all. Instead, it is about the future monarchy Prince William is expected to inherit and the principles that may define it. Throughout the story, attention has focused on symbolism, public perception, institutional structure, and shifting alliances. Yet supporters of the narrative argue that all of these elements ultimately point toward a single objective: the creation of a monarchy that operates according to a more streamlined and clearly defined framework. Whether that interpretation accurately reflects future plans remains impossible to verify, but it has become one of the most widely discussed theories among royal observers because it offers a coherent explanation for a series of developments that many people previously viewed as unrelated. According to supporters of the narrative, Prince William's approach differs from traditional palace power struggles because it is allegedly focused on systems rather than personalities. The argument is that future leadership is not interested in public confrontation, dramatic disagreements, or highly visible displays of authority. Instead, supporters claim the emphasis is on creating structures that make future expectations clear from the beginning. Critics strongly challenge this interpretation, arguing that ordinary succession planning is being presented as evidence of a grand strategy. Yet even they acknowledge that every future monarch eventually shapes the institution according to his or her own priorities. What makes this discussion particularly fascinating is the role many commentators assign to Catherine. Throughout the narrative, Catherine is frequently portrayed as the central figure of the next royal era, not simply because she will one day become queen, but because supporters of the story believe she represents many of the qualities future leadership wants the institution to project: stability, continuity, discipline, public trust, and a strong connection between tradition and modern expectations. According to many analysts, this perception explains why Catherine increasingly appears at the center of discussions involving the monarchy's future direction. At the same time, supporters of the narrative argue that future influence inside the monarchy will be determined less by personal relationships and more by institutional responsibility. They believe the next reign will place greater emphasis on constitutional roles, clearly defined authority, and a smaller number of trusted individuals operating within a more focused structure. Critics maintain that such claims exaggerate developments that are common during every royal transition. Yet the perception continues gaining traction because it aligns with William's long-standing public image as someone interested in modernization and organizational efficiency. According to many commentators, this is ultimately why the story continues attracting attention. The debate is no longer about a brooch, a coronation, a photograph, or any specific event. It is about the future balance of influence within one of the world's most famous institutions. It is about how power evolves between generations. It is about how future leadership decides which traditions to preserve, which structures to modify, and which priorities to emphasize. Supporters of the narrative believe those decisions are already being made. Critics believe much of the story remains speculative, but both sides agree on one important point. The future monarchy increasingly appears to be associated with William and Catherine rather than any other figures within the current royal structure. According to many royal analysts, that reality may prove to be the most significant development of all. Long before any formal transition takes place, public attention has already begun shifting toward the next generation. Discussions about the monarchy's future increasingly revolve around the Prince and Princess of Wales, their vision for the institution, and the values they are expected to bring into the next royal era. Whether the changes ahead prove dramatic or gradual, many observers believe the foundations are already being laid today. And according to supporters of the narrative, that is the real story. Not the removal of influence, not the restructuring of relationships, but the construction of a future monarchy designed to endure long after the current reign eventually comes to an end. What do you think? Is Prince William quietly shaping the future monarchy years before he becomes king? Or are royal commentators reading too much into ordinary succession planning and institutional preparation? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because this remains one of the most debated topics among royal watchers around the world. If you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss our latest coverage of Prince William, Catherine, Princess of Wales, Queen Camilla, and King Charles III as we continue following the stories shaping the future of the British monarchy. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.